welcome to your first date with Flow Builder. So if you've never met before and this is a blind date, or if you've been talking for a while and have a little bit of knowledge, that's totally fine. We're going to help you get a little bit more comfortable with things today. At least that's our goal. All right, so a little bit about me. I am currently the Senior Salesforce Administrator for a software company in the Midwest. I've been working with for just probably about 7 years now. I've gotten 13 certifications over the years. I co-lead a user group in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I am pretty heavily involved with the community and was honored to be added to the 2021 MVP class this year. I'm always happy to chat about Flow or Salesforce in general. I'm much more active on Twitter than anywhere else, but if you're interested in connecting, I'm happy to do so. If you send me a LinkedIn invite, just let me know how we met. That'll definitely help me when I'm accepting all those fun invitations. So today we are going to talk about Flow. So I try to inject some humor in here. Everything that's in like that bluey green color is not actual fact. I just sort of made it up for some fun. Pretty sure Flow doesn't actually have a favorite color, but if it did, I imagine it would be Salesforce Blue. I really like these to be interactive. So if you've got questions, please feel free to speak up. When we get to the hands-on part, if I get moving too quickly, please ask me to slow down. If you miss a step or have questions, I want to make sure that we all manage to get to the end together if you're interested in building along. So yeah, really informal, however we need to do that. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well as if anybody wants to just unmute and speak up. Okay, so some things about Flow. It is the Lightning Flow Builder. However, it does work in both Lightning and Classic. So it does not matter which UI you're using, you can still leverage Flow. There are some components that require Lightning runtime. Again, this does not require you to actually be in Lightning as the UI, but there is a setting that you need to check under your process automation settings to enable Lightning runtime so you can use some of those nifty components, and we'll actually work with one or two of those today. There's a lot of different types of flows available. They have done a lot of great work really building up Flow from what it has been in the past to make it what it is today. One type is screen. And so Screenflows is where you can actually have the user interact with the flow, provide information, select things. So we will go through that today. You can also have auto launched, so triggered by either some Apex code or a process, something like that. Now you can do a record triggered or a schedule triggered. So, you know, either change on record, edit, or create, just like a process does, or scheduled, meaning every Monday at 5 a.m. I want this process to run, or this flow to run, no matter what. In a flow, you can actually retrieve information from the database. You can display it, you can create and update information in the database, and most importantly, you can delete things from the database. So I'm a little bit of a kind of superhero sci-fi nerd. So if any of you are familiar with the Spider-Man comics, Uncle Ben always says, with great power comes great responsibility. So please be careful when you're using delete elements in your flows. It really is deleting stuff out of your org. Flows can also send emails, custom notifications, and it has access to all of the quick and local actions that you have built out in your org for other purposes. So it's pretty cool. You can pull those in without having to rebuild all that functionality. And certain types of flows actually have the ability to call other flows. It's basically called a subflow. So if you're familiar with this on Process Builder, you have what's called an invocable process. And so you can run it when a different process invokes this one. So it does its thing, it gets to this point, and it says, hey, process over there, I need you to come here a minute and do this thing for me. You can do the same thing with the flow. You can get to a certain point in the flow and have it go, hey, other flow, come here, I need some of your help right now. It's really good for kind of working with functionality like Lego blocks. So if you want one thing to happen every time a record gets created or edited, you don't want to have to build that logic twice, because then if you ever need to update it, you have to update it in two different places. And heaven forbid we forget one, right? I'm sure that's never happened to any of us as an admin. We've forgotten to update something. So by being able to do this, you can kind of break it apart into blocks and reuse those pieces as you go. So here's a fun fact, and if we have some time at the end of the session, I'll actually show you a little bit of this, but processes that you build in Process Builder are actually translated into flows under the hood. And so there is actually a way to see this in your org if you know how to get to it. And that is why when your processes fail, if they fail, hopefully you've never seen this email, but if you're like most admins, we're all familiar with the process failed errors, they actually take you through what essentially is a flow debug log. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. All right, so first things first, let's have a little vocabulary lesson. This will just help as we're kind of going through to make sure that we all understand what we're talking about. We'll give everybody kind of a level playing field to start from. So if we're talking about flow or lightning flow, that is the automation tool in Salesforce. So we're going to build a flow. We're going to do that then in the interface that's used to build them, which is the flow builder. One of the things, ever since processes came out, everybody's called them, oh, it's a process builder. Well, process builder technically is the UI where you build a process, but it's so ingrained into the lingo now that we have process builders and we have flows now. But yeah, flow builder is where we're going to go in the org to actually build that. So a flow interview is a flow being run. So whether it runs for one record or it runs and it gets a bunch of records and does things to a bunch of different things in your org, one run through of that flow is called an interview. And you can also do things like you can pause interviews. And so there is a place where you can actually go and see any paused or waiting flow interviews as well in your org. So we're going to talk about elements. And so an element is something that is in the Flow Builder toolbox that you're going to put on the canvas in Flow Builder to do some sort of action. A resource then is part of Flow Builder, and it's going to hold data. So you can think of it kind of like as a bucket or a bag, but it's what we're going to put some data in, and those resources are then going to be used by the elements that we put on the canvas. When we start talking about loops, we're going to go through iterations. And so an iteration is basically one trip through the loop within the flow, and you can loop through multiple iterations within one interview. So there's a little bit of a difference there. Flows have the ability to do decisions and make different choices based on data. So the outcome is the path that we're going to follow based on a decisions criteria. And then we also have faults. So basically, if there's ever an error within your flow, you ask it to do something. Most of the time, flow's pretty stupid. If you don't explicitly tell it what you want it to do, it will do nothing. So one of the things that you want to make sure you do when you're building flows is you handle situations that could end up causing a fault or an error, and do what we call fault handling, which is don't let the flow go, well, I don't know what you want me to do, so I'm going to go watch some TV. See you later. Instead, you want to tell flow, okay, so if something goes wrong, don't quit and go watch TV. Instead, I need you to do this thing. Whether it's tell the user something's wrong, send an email to an admin so they can fix it, or what have you. Okay. So we're going to jump in to Flow Builder. The different types, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different ones that keep popping up. So we have Screenflows. They can be launched from Lightning pages, communities, quick actions, all sorts of places, but it allows the user to actually interact with the flow. The screen gives them the ability to put information in, view information, all sorts of things. It's entirely possible that you have actually gone to a website with a company that uses communities built on Salesforce, and you've gone through a flow on their webpage to submit a contact us form or pick products or anything like that. Scheduled triggered flow, you can set this to run at a specified time and frequency. So I want to run this once a month, I want to run this once ever, but I don't want it to run until next Monday, all sorts of things like that. Auto-launched flows don't have a specific trigger. Instead, something else calls them and is the trigger point for that. It runs in the background, so you cannot have any screens or anything for user input. It's all got to be self-contained. Essentially, this is going to be more or less like a process with a few differences. The one that's almost exactly like a process then is this record triggered flow, because instead of a process having to catch the change to the record happening and go, hey flow, come on, I need you to do something. Now we're able to do that straight from the flow itself. So whether a record's created, updated, or deleted, you can have some stuff happen in the background. And then finally, you have platform event triggered flows. So platform events is not something I'm super familiar with, but what someone helped me understand this with is an analogy of like listening to the radio. The radio is broadcasting all day, whether you have it turned on or not. So essentially what they do is they publish platform events on Salesforce. So things happen. Maybe accounts are updated, opportunities are created, custom objects are being changed, deleted, added, what have you. All of these things are events happening on a platform. So you can build a publisher that says, hey, I changed an account. Hey, I updated an opportunity. Hey, I made this new custom object. And it's going to tell every time this happens, it's going to broadcast or publish that, just like a radio's there. What you can then do is you can subscribe for certain types of events and go, well, I have no interest at all in accounts. I don't care what you do with accounts. It's not the channel or station I want to listen to. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to tune in. Every time you update an opportunity, I want to know. So you can subscribe to the channel of this radio, like the radio station, that says, hey, I updated an opportunity. Hey, I created a new opportunity. Hey, we deleted an opportunity. And that is the platform event. And then that can trigger a flow to happen every time that specific type of event happens on the platform. So it's something I haven't gotten into using because I'm not real familiar with the whole platform events thing. But there's a lot of people, especially in the developer side of things, that think this is pretty awesome. Hoping someday to learn more about it and have a use case for it. Okay, so the Flow Builder UI, if we go in here, we've got a couple of different pieces. So this is the canvas, this big white box over here. And so this is where you're going to drag all of your elements to build your flow. Essentially, it's going to end up looking like a flow chart. So if you remember back in school, if you ever had to build flow charts to kind of figure out a logical progression through a process or something, that's essentially what we're going to build. Over here on the left, we have our toolbox. So our toolbox has all of the elements that we can click and drag over to our canvas to do different things. So there's interactions, like putting a screen or an action or calling a subflow. There's logic, what we want the flow to do. So being able to set a value for something, make a decision based on some information, or loop through some different records. And then all of these pink elements actually are DML statements. They interact with your database. You can do whatever you want on a flow canvas, and it's not going to touch anything in your org unless there's something pink on the canvas. So it's almost like a sandbox within your org. So you should be doing this in a sandbox, obviously, so it's a sandbox in a sandbox. But if I wanted to put a screen on here and ask somebody to rename an account, I could do an assignment. I could ask them to rename this account 17 times if I wanted. It's not going to make a single change in the database until I actually put either a create record or an update record on the canvas and connect it, because that's what actually says, all right, whatever this is, I want you to actually save it as if someone typed this into a record field on a UI. Then we have three different menus. So this top left menu gives you the ability to undo, redo whatever you just did. It gives you the ability to copy an element that's on your canvas. So if you need to do something kind of twice with maybe it's two different decision outcomes, and you just need to change, in this case, I want you to update a picklist field to X, and in that case, I want you to update a picklist field to Y. You can copy the element and then make some minor changes instead of having to build it all from scratch. The little gear next to it is where you're going to be able to see your properties. And there's some pretty cool things that we can do with that, but we'll show you a little bit later. So the top right has the ability for you to switch to their auto layout function. This is a different way to build flows. Honestly, I've been doing it so long the old way that auto layout confuses the heck out of me. But it can be easier for some new builders because it shows you exactly where you can insert things to put them in the right order. You also have the ability to run, debug, activate, and then save as or save your flow. So the first time you save it, obviously you're going to do a save as, and then as you update it after that, you'll do saves. You can activate it straight from the canvas when you're ready, but honestly, the bread and butter of this is debug. Unlike a process where you have to build it, turn it on, and then go change a record somewhere to see if it worked right, you can actually run this in a test mode before you activate it to make sure that it behaves the way you expect it to. And then if it doesn't, you can fix it without having to clone it and create a new version like you do with processes, or like you used to have to do with flows, because you can only have so many versions of a flow or process in your org. I think the limit's still 50. And then you have to start deleting the old ones out. So instead of activate it, try something, crap, that didn't work, deactivate it, clone it, keep going, just debug it. It makes things 100% easier. And then down here we have your canvas tools. This one is for you to be able to grab a large section of elements and drag them all around the canvas in a group. Then you have the ability to either shrink your canvas, auto size your canvas to pull the whole flow into view, or zoom it out. I've seen some pretty crazy flows in my day. They can get really big and complicated, so this is definitely helpful if you're wanting to look at an overall picture, or if you need to zoom in on a specific section to either build on it or see what's really going on. Okay, so the toolbar elements that we have. A screen. This is what you're going to use in a screen flow to have your user interact with you. So you can put all sorts of input fields in here, just about everything that you have available to you in terms of fields on a custom object or standard object that you can build, with the exception of we have the ability to do radio buttons, and we can do checkbox groups instead of just having to do multi-select pick lists. So there's a couple cool things that you can do in Flow that's not in a record UI. You can display text to your user. If you need to give them directions or something, you can have text that's just there for display. And then there's other special components, things like address, phone number, email, that have some extra kind of configuration in the background for how an address should actually be formatted, or making sure that an email address has the correct format and phone numbers do as well. So actions. This can be any quick or standard action that's in your org, things like send an email or log a call, or any of your custom quick actions that are on your objects. Subflow, again, you can call another flow from within this flow, and right now these are available on auto launched and screen flows, and you can only call a screen flow from another screen flow, so you can't auto launch it on a record change and then all of a sudden have it pop up a screen for the user. You need to start with the screen flow in that example. Okay, so the logic, we're just manipulating data within your flow. This isn't doing anything to your database yet. So assignments is how you set the value of a variable. And so we'll talk about a variable in a little bit, but essentially everything that you do in a flow needs to have a container to put it in. You don't get to just talk about, you know, data and throw it out on the ground. Everything needs to be very organized and orderly. So a variable is a container that you can put information in and then make changes to it as you go through. So in theory, you could set a record field value to the value of a field from a flow screen, which we'll do in a little bit when we get to building. Or you could use an assignment to set the count of records that were pulled back in a collection versus looping through them and having to implement a counter by one every time. A decision, again, it's basically based on different criteria. You can branch your flow down different paths. So if it's type residential, I want it to go this way. If it's type business, I want it to go that way. And you can have more than two. So you could have 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 or more. I've never tried to find out what the limit is of decision element or decision outcomes that you can have. But basically, it just becomes spokes off of the decision element for which path it's going to go. You can definitely put decisions in loops. So if you have a stack of records that you want to go through, essentially you can pick up every record in that stack one at a time, look for some information in it, and say, okay, because it says X, I want to go down path 1. And because it says Y, I want to go down path 2 for different records. So a loop then is used to go through a group of records, which is a collection variable. So you have a variable that can hold one thing, or you can have a collection variable that can hold any number of things that could be one or more. So if you don't know if you're going to get one or more records back, the collection variable is usually a good thing to use, and we'll talk through that a little bit. For example, if we wanted to loop through all the contact records on an account, which we'll actually do today, and update their address, that is something that you would use a loop for. So really important, don't put pink in a loop. So all those data elements that we talked about, creating, updating, getting or deleting records, you don't want to put those in a loop, because every time you do that, you call the database. And there are these things in Salesforce called governor limits. We'll talk about a little bit more. But essentially what you're doing is you're making a lot of unnecessary calls to the database, which is going to hit that governor limit, and that's an unrecoverable error. Like, you cannot do anything. It just says, nope, stop, you're done, and everything you tried to do, it's out of here. Okay, so the data elements are what interact with your Salesforce database. This is where it gets real. So if you need to make a new record or group of records in the database, so let's say I want to create a new account, I'm going to use a create record. If I have an existing account in the database that I want to make a change to, I'm going to use an update element, because it's going to go find that record and say, okay, you see what's in this field, overwrite it with this other value. And to be able to do that, I'm going to use a get records that says, this is the account I'm looking for. It's named Acme Inc. Go find it in my database. And then I'm going to take that, I'm going to find the address, and I'm going to update it and use that update then to change the address. Delete does actually delete records out of your database. It's real. Like I said, great power, great responsibility. Please be careful when you're doing that. All I can say is yay for Recycle Bin. I'm so glad it's in Lightning now. Okay, so resources then. Resources are what we are going to use to hold the data that we want to work with. And so some of the different types that we have are variables. It's a container that can change shape. So think of it as like a bag. You can throw a box in a bag, or you can throw a ball in a bag, or you can throw your laptop in a bag, or you can throw a stuffed animal Astro in a bag. Bag will hold all of those things, even though the shapes are different and the contents are different. A constant is a container to hold information that's not going to change. So it's a special shaped container, essentially. And whatever you put in it has to stay whatever you put in it at first. So some of the things that you might put in there is if you have a price that you want to use, or a multiplier for something, saying, you know, every time we do a deal, we have a markup that's 10%. 10% is a constant. You can put that in that constant, and every time you want it, go grab the markup. It's always that constant at 10%. It doesn't change. A formula, just like formula fields in your org or formulas in Excel, it's a way to manipulate information. There's all different kinds of formulas. You can have a Boolean formula that comes out to be true or false. You can have a text formula. So if you want to add two things together, if you have like a first name and a last name, and you switch them together to get a full name, or it can be numbers. So if you want to calculate the cost of something with a markup, you know, 100 plus a 10% markup equals 110. A text template is somewhere that you can store information that is formatted and can be manipulated in the flow. So if you think about an email template where it says, dear, insert name here, comma, return page break or line break, thank you for your order number, insert whatever the order number is. That would be done with a text template. So you can also pull in variables for that information that's going to change every time you create a new one of these. So if I order something, it says, dear Michelle. Otherwise, the next time we run through, Chelsea's getting something, dear Chelsea. My order number is going to be different from hers, so we want that information to be able to change. Okay, choices. As I mentioned before, you can have the user interact with things on a screen, and anytime you have a pick list or radio buttons or anything like that, the things on the screen that they can actually select from are choices, and you need to build those in a couple of different ways. Number one is for you just to build out all the choices. So if I want to ask the user, what's your favorite color? and I'm going to give them choices. Maybe my choices are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. I'm not going to give you the option to have black as your favorite color. I'm not going to give you the option to have braid as your favorite color. So I've built those choices that I want them to have to pick from. I can also, because we're in Salesforce, have it pull back a set of records. And so it's a choice set based on actual records. So maybe what I want to do is find me all of the accounts that are in California. And so I'm going to have it go query the database and find a list of all of the accounts that are in California, and then that's going to populate a choice for a screen element, whether it's a radio button or a pick list or anything, and they're going to pick one of those records. You can also do a Picklist Choice Set, which is if you have this pick list that already exists somewhere in your org, you don't have to rebuild it from scratch, which is just wasted effort because you've already built it once on the object. So instead of saying I want to go rebuild my choices for favorite color, I'm going to go to my user object that has that favorite color pick list, and I'm going to go find the user object's favorite color field, and all of those values in that pick list are going to be used here as well. Stage gives you the ability to kind of use like a progress bar within your flow. So if you're familiar with opportunity stages, it kind of shows you how you're progressing through your opportunity from the first time it opens and is like qualified all the way up until you close win it. So you can do the same thing, especially if you have long, complicated flows or you've got multiple pages that you want your users to have to step through, especially on communities or something like that. Knowing how far along you are in this process can be helpful. So that's what we're attempting to do there with that. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions before we keep going. I know I threw a lot of information at you, so we'll take a minute, give you the ability to digest.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in chat, but you guys have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask directly here. So right now we are just seeing presentation and that's going on. Probably if you're going to share, Michelle, something on your org, then maybe make sure you share that screen as well.
Yep, we will get to that for sure.
Hi, Michelle. This is Pratyusha. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. When you're saying like you query the contacts related to an account and update the address, right? I remember for this process, I used Flow one time and I got this governor limit, that circle error. Like if a contact has around 2000, if an account has around 2000 contacts, whenever an address on the account gets updated, I wanted to update all those contacts addresses. Can we able to manage to handle that through Flow, because there are 2000 contacts and we have that 150 circle limit, right? How do we manage that in Flow? Can we be able to do that?
So entertainingly enough, we are going to build that exact use case today.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Thank you. Then I'll see that.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely, you can. We're going to do several different use cases to build, and we're going to go and we're going to do it kind of the old way, which is probably how you hit governor limits, because it's a good way to teach loops. But then I'm going to show you the new way that you can do it that should allow you to get around those limits. Now, granted, I haven't tried with huge accounts with thousands and thousands of contacts, but in theory, the way this is built, it should work. So we'll walk through it, and then, you know, as always, my disclaimer should flash above my head is please try this in the sandbox first.
Yes, got it. Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
absolutely.
So we got another question, similar line about you can Flow handle 200 records. So we're gonna see that in action. I guess there's another question from Naresh. Do we need to name the variable as record ID every time we want to pass the record ID to Flow?
Technically, no. There are different ways that you can have other named variables that are available for input that you can pass into Flow. But record ID is a reserved variable, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And so what you don't want to do is name anything else record ID if you don't want to use it for that. So I suppose it's one of those things where while you don't necessarily have to do that way, also don't try and reuse that for something other than what Salesforce intended it for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So Naresh, you got that? Or if you have any further questions, you can unmute and talk. Okay.
Do we also have a code or script block associated with a flow? Probably deep down underneath where you can get to. Flows are translated into Apex. I do not know how to find or get to that. But yes, somewhere in the back end of what Salesforce is built on top of the database, it all gets translated into code. I just don't quite know how to get to it.
All right. So I think that's it. Yeah, we can continue.
Okay. So one of the things that I wish I would have known when I got started with Flow is kind of something that comes from Apex code, and it's naming conventions. So there was a blog post that came out recently called Best Practices for Flows, and there's a lot of things in there about naming conventions, and I agree with some of them. I maybe don't agree with all of them, and that could just be that I grew up learning flows on my own instead of having some formal training. So what I generally will encourage is find what works for you. If you don't follow the same naming convention as other companies or what they recommend in that blog, it's probably not going to hurt anything that badly, as long as you're having standards in your org that are maintained and everyone on your team and in your org understands what this means. So your resources, you have the label and the API name, just like you have for all of your fields and objects and everything else in Salesforce. So the naming conventions I'm talking about generally are about the API names and not the labels. Camelcase is a standard for naming variables and resources in Apex code, so I see no reason not to do it. Essentially what it is the first letter is lowercase, and then every new word gets the first letter capitalized. If you think about reading hashtags, if I kept everything lowercase in a hashtag, it would be super hard to actually figure out what it says, and you have to like guess at where the breaks are in the words. By capitalizing the first letter, they're way easier to read. Same thing happens here. I also encourage you to include some type of resource abbreviation for easy reference. So here's just some of the ways that I have done it. I start all my variables with var, and then I throw an underscore, and then I name them. And I make them pretty obvious. Sometimes my variable names are long, but my variable names are also really easy to read for people who are not necessarily coders. Formulas, I go FML. You could do FMLA. I kind of like it because F my life is occasionally how I feel when I'm working with formulas, so it seemed appropriate. For choices, if it's just a generic choice that I'm going to use, I'll do a C underscore. So C underscore yes, C underscore no. If I have a pick list that has multiple choices, I will also give it some sort of pick list reference so I know which pick list this is for. So C underscore product underscore training, C underscore product underscore reporting, C underscore product underscore whatever else we have. Collection variables, I just do a CVAR. So I know that I'm expecting potentially more than one record in there, or really only should ever have one. When I do pick list choice sets, I pull in also the object name that that pick list lives on so I can find it easier. And then I basically name it whatever that field is. So PCS, pick list choice set, account type field. If I have any questions about where I pulled this pick list choice set from, I can tell because it's right there. But honestly, it's do what works for you. If you haven't done it in the past and you've got flows in your org, I get it. Tech debt's always a thing. I'm not saying you need to go back and fix that, but going forward, try and introduce some standards. Document them, share them with the team. When you're doing reviews or looking, at people's builds, just mention that, hey, we want to try and keep this standardized. But one of the reasons I really like this is because I will also often have a variable and a formula that would end up with the same name because I use the formula to populate my variable. So that helps me keep them straight when they're kind of the same thing. And I need to make sure I can keep track of which one is which. Okay, so reserved variables. We had a question earlier from, is it Nagesh? I probably butchered your name and I'm so sorry. I'm trying to learn.
No problem. Yes.
So record ID and this very specific version of it is reserved by Salesforce. It is used to pass the ID of the record that you're on when the flow launches so that the flow has some sort of context for the interview. So if it's a flow that's supposed to work on something with accounts, well, what account do you want me to do this to? I don't know unless you tell me, so use that record ID. And again, syntax matters. This is an example of that Camelcase. Lowercase r, uppercase I, are required. So if you do capital R, capital I, not the same thing. Capital R, lowercase I, not the same thing. Throwing an underscore in there, not the same thing. So like I mentioned, you don't necessarily have to name your input variable record ID. If you wish to, you certainly can, but I also would not recommend using this form of record ID for anything other than that. Otherwise, when other people look at your code, they're probably, or your flows, they're probably going to be a little confused. So the other reserved variable is $record. So the $sign generally indicates that it's a placeholder or some sort of global variable that Salesforce has kind of system-wide. And so this one is a variable that's used to hold the record that a scheduled flow interacts with. So every time you have a record that changes, it triggers a flow. But that record is different every time. And I don't know until that record changes which one it is. So I need a placeholder that can say, okay, well, this one was on the Acme account, and that one's on the Dunder Mifflin account, and this one's on the Microsoft account. So $record is whatever record we were working on is the one I want you to do this for. So it gives us a way to tell Flow what we want it to do to whichever record that is. So kind of the weird thing about scheduled flows, it will always run a separate interview of a flow for every record that meets the entry criteria. So if I were to schedule a flow on Monday morning that takes every account in California and updates a field on that account, and I have 20 accounts in California, I'm going to run 20 flow interviews, each one on one of those 20 records. So this is kind of the only time where bulkification on record updates is not needed. You know, I stressed a lot, don't put pink inside a loop, don't make extra calls to the database, don't do all of these things. Like, this is the exception to that rule. Because everything else you think about, you want to think about doing in bulk, and we'll talk about that in just a minute when we kind of go through what loops are and how to deal with them. And this is the one time where you can kind of all that out the window and go, this is only ever going to run on one record at a time, and you can build it with that assumption in mind.
One quick question, Michelle, here. So how many records it can process in a schedulable flow?
I don't know the limits because Flow handles the batching behind the scenes. So if you have, basically it does batches of 200. So if you have multiple records and more than 200, it handles those batching processes in the back and does them in batches of 200. I have not run across what that functional limit actually is. I'd say Google it. Maybe someone has posted an answer to that question somewhere, or you can always try it in Sandbox. If we ever find out what that record limit is, I would love to know it. While we're talking about limits, just some other trivia. You have a limit of, I think it's 100 DML calls to the database in a Flow transaction. I think you have 150 is the limit for SQL queries. And you have a limit of hitting 2,000 elements on your flow canvas. And so that becomes important with things like loops. I think, who was it that asked that question earlier? Pratyusha? I probably butchered your name too, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
But when you're trying trying to update all of those contacts,
Mhm.
generally you use a loop. And so if you have 4 elements in your loop and an update after the fact and a get records before that, 6 elements on your canvas. So every time you run through one contact, you're hitting 4 elements plus 2 more. So if you can only run through 2,000 elements, once you hit 500, you're in trouble because you run into the limit of how many elements you can access on a single flow interview.
Got it. Okay.
So that's just some other kind of flow limit trivia stuff. I'm sure if you Google flow limits, you're going to find all sorts of fun stuff with that. Okay. So loops. Is there anybody here who's not familiar with what a filing cabinet is? I feel like we're getting to the point in society where people under a certain age maybe have never seen a filing cabinet before. So just want to make sure that everybody actually knows what a filing cabinet is. If not, we can talk about that for sure. Okay, not seeing anybody that says, yeah, we don't know what that is. So when I talk about loops and flows, I usually talk in terms of filing cabinets and desks. So in theory, what we're doing is we're going to walk over to a filing cabinet. And that filing cabinet is our Salesforce database. And we are going to go and we're going to pull all of the files from the filing cabinet that we need. So again, let's use all of our accounts in California as our example. So you're going to go and you're going to grab this record and that record and this one over here, and you're going to have a stack of 20 records, and you're going to bring them back to your desk. And so your desk is the flow. And so now let's say that all 20 of these records that are accounts in California need a record field updated because now you have all of the California privacy requirements. And so you want to put a flag on these records that they have special privacy requirements because of California law. Well, if you open the top one on your desk and you take a pen and you check a box on their file, it does not automatically bleed through to the other 19 files. So instead, what you have to do is you have to pick the first one up off the stack, put it in front of you on the desk, open it up, find the page on the record, check it with your pen. Now, how many of you at this point, once you've done this, want to take that one record, pick it up, walk across the office, back to the filing cabinet, and file it? Then come back to your desk, sit back down, grab the next one, open it up, check the box, take that file, walk back over to the filing cabinet, and put it away. Is anybody here interested in doing this? All right, I'm seeing some head shakes. So essentially, that's what you're doing when you put that data element inside your loop. Every time you're done with one record on your desk, you're walking it back to the filing cabinet. If you had a secretary that was doing this for you and you kept yelling at your secretary to come get this file every time you signed one of them or checked the box on one of them, your secretary is going to quit by about number 5. So instead, what we do is we do 2 assignments within our loop. And that second assignment is like putting it in a separate stack to your right. So we have a stack to our left of all of our accounts. We grab the first one, we put it in front of us, we're in the loop. That's our first record. We edit the record, we find that field, we check the box. Now, instead of getting up and walking to the filing cabinet, we just shove it on over to the right side of our desk. And so this is where inside of a loop, we do a second assignment and we add it to a collection variable. So then we go and we get the next record, put it on the desk in front of us, check our box, and stick it on the stack to our right. And we're going to continue to do this until all 20 of those have that box checked. Then we're going to take that one stack of 20 records, pick them all up at the same time, walk back over to the filing cabinet, and put them all away. And so this is where we take that pink update records and we do it outside the loop after the loop is completed. And we're actually going to build this use case so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about and how this all works. But this is called bulkifying your flow, because essentially what we want to do is we want to handle all of our DML calls, which is database markup language. It's how you talk to your Salesforce org. We want to make as few of those calls as possible so that you don't hit governor limits. So, and basically a governor limit is what it sounds like. The governor is in charge and they are, trying to enforce limits on everybody. Salesforce is a multi-tenant platform. So all of us customers are using that same platform. And so to make sure that we all can do what we need to, we have to share that pool of resources. And unlike some other things in life, Salesforce resources are like pie. I love pie. I want to eat pie. When I start eating your pie, you get a little upset with me because you also love pie, and now I've eaten your pie and you don't get any. So governor limits are like pie. Once you've eaten yours, you're done, and you don't get to have anybody else's. And so that is why if you hit a governor limit, it's unrecoverable because now you're trying to steal somebody else's piece of pie. So this is what we're trying to avoid by bulkifying our flow. We can basically, instead of having 100 tiny little calls to the database, we're going to make one big call to the database, but it's only one call and it only counts as one. Okay, so again, I'll stop there and I'm going to switch out of a presentation and over to a demo org. So while we're doing that, any questions so far?
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you guys have questions, you can unmute yourself and speak up. If you don't see unmute button, probably your audio is not connected. You need to rejoin or connect to the audio again.
All right, so I just have a brand new Trailhead org I spun up about 10 minutes before our session today. So any of these orgs that you have, dev org, Trailhead Playground, should work just fine. If you have existing automations in there from other things you've done, there's a possibility they may not play nicely together. So that's why I recommended having a brand new one. But you're certainly welcome to follow along and build, even if we don't have you test it and try it. So one other thing that I do want to note before we get too far in this is that these scenarios are designed to showcase concepts. They are probably not something you really want to go back and do in your org for some of these. So use this to get some ideas. Some of these, and I'll try and call them out, would be reasonable for you to use in real life, but there are some things that we're going to do in ways that will probably cause errors if you try and do them with large quantities of data. But I want to use that scenario to teach you a specific kind of skill in flow. Okay, so time to get hands-on. And our first scenario is going to be that we have a problem with user adoption. And all of our users basically are complaining that it's so hard, it takes too long, so many steps to create an account and a contact. And so we have been tasked as admins to fix this problem. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a screen flow that allows the user to capture basic account and contact data basically on one single screen. So instead of creating the account and having to hit save and then go to the related list and hit new contact and fill out all those fields, we're going to make this a more streamlined process. So this is absolutely a real world scenario as long as you flesh it out a little bit more than what we're about to do. We are going to keep this very high level and basic. Okay, so we are going to jump over to setup. And then in setup, you can either type flows in the quick find box, which I generally tend to do. But if you're one of those people that likes to know where this is, it's under the process automation menu where process builder also is. And we're going to go to flows. So once we get to flows, let's go ahead and click new. And this is going to pull up our flow builder for us to decide what kind of flow we want. And now we are basically mimicking the behavior of creating records. So we need information from our user. That means we need a screen flow. So we'll go ahead and hit next. I'm going to do this free form today. You're certainly welcome to use the auto layout feature, and you can actually flip back and forth between the two if you want to build it one way and then see how it looks the other one. But we're just going to start with free form. So, okay, I've got a blank canvas with a start element. So basically this is where the flow is going to kick off from. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to gather some information from the user. So I'm going to click and drag over a screen element. I'm going to give it a name. And this is just going to be the data entry screen. So I can also do this and just call it data entry if I want. Again, I've got my prefix here. I'm going to skip descriptions for today for the sake of time, but please, please fill out your descriptions. Make sure the people who are building in the org after you can understand what you did and why. But for today, for the sake of time, we're going to skip those. So now I have this empty screen that's going to display to the user, and I need to start adding stuff to it. So first things first, if I want to build an account, I need a name. So I can either scroll or I can search until I get down here and I find a text box. So I'm just going to pull a text field over onto the screen. The label will display to the user, so account name. And so I'm also going to make this required because we can't actually build this field in the database unless it's required or unless it's filled out. So we have to require it. Okay, so after that, what else do I really want to know about this account? Well, there's a couple of things that we can do. We want an address. So we can either use the address component, which has some of those nifty bells and whistles that I mentioned earlier. But for the sake of speed, I'm just going to do this with a bunch of different text boxes, and we're going to use a special component for some of the rest. So I want street, city, state, zip code. So I'm going to drag those fields over, and then I'm going to start giving them labels. So I want the street address. Then I want the city. I have a little kitty cat on my desk who's trying to help me type, so we'll see how many errors we get with this today. I want the state. This I'm also going to require because I want to make sure I at least know what state this account is in case we have any that have the same name that might be in different states to help me identify one account from the other. And then I'm going to put in the zip or postal code. Okay, now I also would like to know what their website address is. So in this case, I could do another text box, but I'm going to drag over the URL component. And so this is one of those components that requires the Lightning runtime. And you're going to see that when I pulled over just a text box, it was pretty simple and straightforward. Give it a label, make sure it has a name. Do you want it to be required? Is there a default value? The URL gets a little bit more complicated. So the API name, I'm going to go with URL, but I'm actually going to change the label that displays to website because that's what I want to show them. So for some reason, they give you the option to decide if this is going to be disabled or not. I have no idea why we would do that. I also have no idea why we would make this particular one read only, so I'm going to leave that to false as well. I'm actually going to change this one to true. So if you type in true, it's going to give you this global constant true, and you'll notice that $sign in the front that I mentioned earlier. And so this is going to require the website, which you can see by the little red asterisk. Okay, so now we should have everything we want in here. If we want a default value, we can put this in. We can put the default value in as http:// if we want them to make sure that they include that. Okay, so now I've got pretty much everything I want for the account. Now I need my contact information. And again, we said we were going to do this on one screen. So I'm going to grab my name. And so again, we can use that super interesting and special kind of component for name. So I'm just going to call this name for the API name. The fields to display are going to be first name and last name. So you can see how this looks over here. Do you want to add any others? Do you want middle or informal or anything like that? We're just going to leave it as is. And it's going to give them options for salutation. So we could also come in here and add one for doctor if we wanted to. And we could include suffixes if we wanted juniors and seniors or anything like that. But for now, we're just going to go with that here. I'm also going to pull over the email component. So, because I want to make sure that I have a contact email address for any contact we put in. So again, I want this to be required. So I'm going to change this required down here to true. And then I can put placeholder text in here, or you can see it's actually going to show you in example.com. So we have placeholder text to make sure that people understand the format that we need to put an email address in case there's anyone in the world that doesn't know that. Okay, so we should be pretty good. I've got what I need to have a basic account and contact. So I'm going to go ahead and hit done on my screen. And then I'm going to connect this, so I grab from the circle on the start and make sure it actually pulls the line so it's the little pointy finger, not the hand. And as long as this turns highlighted, it doesn't have to be right on the circle. Anywhere in the blue is fine to connect it. If you're one of those very particular people like me that needs your line straight, you can certainly work on that. Some people are like, that's not a big deal, I don't care. But now we're also going to save it. So, and I'm going to call this my create account and contact flow. I'm also going to go into show advanced. So, because there's different things that we can do in here, and one of these that I really like is system context. So user or system context just depends on how the flow is launched. You actually have the ability to decide if you want your users to be restricted by their profile permissions and their role permissions, or if you want to grant them larger access into your org. There may be some fields that on a new account, they need to provide you with that information, but you don't necessarily want them going to a record and messing with that information once it's in. Like maybe it's a legal name that you want your legal department to have to go find how they're actually registered with the state, and only they should be able to change that. So one of my favorite things to do is actually put this in system context without sharing access all data. I'm guiding them through this process, so it's okay if they're able to touch things or update things that normally they wouldn't be able to on a record, because I'm basically shepherding them through this process and holding their hand. So this is one of my favorite things to do with flows, is I can have them do things within the context of the flow that I normally wouldn't allow them to do. You also have the option to do system context with sharing, so they can only get to records that they have access to in the org anyway. But system context means if there's fields on that record, it doesn't obey their profile or permission set's field level security. So they can only get to the records that they have access to, but they can do anything they want with those records within the confines of what the flow is set up to do. So yeah, but this is one of those things I really like about flow. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to save this. Perfect. No errors. Like I said, now we can debug this. So let's see what our flow actually looks like. So if I hit the debug button, it's going to open a new tab and it's going to show me exactly what my user is going to see. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run. And here we go. I get this screen. Not too bad. But I notice a few things on here I'm not super pumped about, like where's my account, where's my contact? I feel like I want to break those up a little bit now that I'm seeing that, so that we can make it a little more obvious to the user what they're doing. So I'm going to close that. I'm going to go back over to my screen, and now I'm going to find a display text. I'm going to put one up at the top. I'm going to give it a name. Call it display text account info, and then I'm going to actually put this in here, account information. So you can see it populate up here with what it looks like. Ain't nobody gonna see that. That's just a waste of my time. So I'm gonna make it bold. I wanna center it. I'm gonna make this much bigger. And for good measure, I want this to be blue. So I'm gonna go pick me a blue color, and I'm gonna turn that blue, and I want it underlined. Okay, so now I'm gonna grab a second display text, and I'm gonna drag it right above the name. And this is where I'm going to put a label for contact information. I can do the same thing here. Contact information. Pick that up. I think we made it like 20, bold, underlined, put it in the middle. And this time, let's go pick a nice green color. Okay. So quick little edit there. Again, I want to save it so it commits those changes. Now, if I debug my flow again, that screen looks a little bit better. It's easier for me to see, okay, this is what I need for the account. This is what I need for the contact. Hey, it's all on one page. My users can see that very easily. So we're ready to go. All right, so we're done with that so far. Now that we've captured the information from the users, we need to actually create these records. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab a create records, and we're going to drag it over. So this, you have to do every create one per object. So we're going to end up with 2 of these. And so this one I'm just going to call create account. So how many records do I want to create? Just one account. Then how do I want to set my record fields? I want to pull all of them from separate resources or literal values that my user entered in that previous screen. Okay, so then it says, all right, well, what are we creating? And I want an account. So we're going to go find the account object. And so the field values that we need for our account, we are going to need a name. And we know we have an address, and so you've got the option of where to put it. So I'm just going to put this in as the shipping address. So I'm going to pull in my shipping state. I'm a huge fan of type ahead because there's tons and tons and tons of fields on here, and I really don't like scrolling through all these to try and find them. I know what I'm looking for. So that one was shipping city. Now we're going to do state. You do have to actually know how to type if you want to do this. And I didn't even grab the right field, so we'll do state. There we go. Now I can get to my state. And then I need my zip, my postal code. So the one other piece of information that I asked for was their website. So I can find their website here, and that's the name of the field on the record, which is why I decided to name it website in my flow for consistency, so that they're used to seeing website on the record, and that's what they see in my flow. So now that we know the field values on the account that we want to set, we need to actually set the values. And so what we're going to do over here for the name is we have resources built for us for all of those screen components. So if we scroll down here to screen components, I have one that says account name. So I'm going to set the account name to the name field on the account object that we create. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go find my street address. And then I'm going to go find my city. Then we'll do the same thing for our state. And finally, we'll get our zip or postal code. Then our website, again, that's that special type of component that we use. So it's not as easy as just grabbing the text field. But I do have that URL, and you see it has this little pushy arrow caret thing next to it. So you can go into and actually see all of the items that are part of its configuration. So if you remember, we didn't disable it, we gave it a label. We did not mark it as read-only, we did mark it as required, but what I want to pull is the value. The value is where it's going to store the user's input from that field. So this is dot notation. It actually says URL.value in here, which is kind of hard to see, and unfortunately it's not real nice when I try and zoom it. Because I cannot ignore the red squiggly line. But essentially, this is called dot notation. You're going to see this anytime you start working with records that already exist in your database. It's going to pull your account.name field, for example. So it's going to specify kind of the object and then the field on that object that we're working with. Okay, so we are ready with that. I can hit done. So first things first, from screen to create. So pull that out just a little bit. Now I need to do another create record so that I can create the contact. Okay, again, we're just asking for one record. And again, we want to pull that from what the user entered, so that's separate resources and literal values. Now we're going to go find our contact object. And we're going to start setting those. So we asked for 3 pieces of information, and we need our name. So we've got to grab our first name. We need to grab our last name. And we wanted to make sure that we had an email address. And it's right there. Look at that. So again, now I'm going to come over here and set those values. So I want to go look for my screen element of that name. And again, I want to pull my first name into the first name field. And then we're going to go to name and last name for that last name field. And then on email, we use the email right here. And again, I need to go find that value to be able to put the value of the last name in there. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and hit done, connect this, and hit
We
save.
we
Is
need to
everybody with
enter,
us?
Michelle, we need to enter account ID also, right? Because you're creating contact. Is it mandatory on the contact or not?
Technically, it's not, but thank you very much for getting to my next point. That was perfect. So if I create this contact the way I have, it's going to be an orphan contact. And the only person in the entire org that's going to be able to see this contact and know it exists is the person who created it. And it's not going to be tied to the account because we did not put the account ID in here. So I am going to go back in here and I'm going to make sure that I add this one last field. So account ID. Now here is the cool thing about it. Salesforce is actually going to give us the ID from the account that we just created. So if I scroll down here to variables, and it just disappeared on me, thanks so much, appreciate that. I can actually see that I have an account ID from my create account element that's been populated here for me. Salesforce says, oh, you created a record in the database inside this flow. I'll bet you're going to need that for something later. So let me tee this up and give it to you here. And so I can just pick that for my create account, and that goes right to my account ID.
Oh, it's good to know. I don't know that it will give the ID automatically. I always create ID field, variable ID, and then manually store that from the previous step. That's good to know. Thank you.
There is no reason to manually create that variable anymore. Now here is a wrinkle for any of you who know, and if you're new to Flow, just don't listen to this. It's going to confuse you, and that's fine. But if you actually set this to a variable for like a new object variable, instead of having just a variable for the account ID, you will use the dot notation in that variable dot ID to pull this. So depending on how you create your record, there's two different ways to get to that new record ID. Screwed me up super big time and had to end up calling Salesforce support and have them teach me how to do this, and then I felt like a stupid idiot. So I will pass that along to you so you don't have to encounter that same problem. All right, so now we've got this. We're going to hit save. Now, the last thing I like to do with this is when something's happening behind the scenes, I like to give my users a sense of comfort that whatever was supposed to happen actually did. So we're going to grab one more screen and drag this over, and this is going to be my confirmation screen, or my success screen. So I'm going to call this my confirmation screen. And I'm just going to display a little message here. Yes, your account and contact were successfully created. Now we can do something a little bit nifty here. If we wanted, we could actually display to them the account that got created and the contact that got created. And so what I'm actually going to do is go find my resources. And I'm going to grab there it is, account name. And then my contact. I need to grab my contact name, first name, put a space in there, and then go grab my contact's name, last name. So I'm going to make these bold, a little bit bigger. And again, I like big, bright messages, so let's do red this time. You know, red's probably not the best. Red usually looks like a problem. So, you know what? Today's purple day. We'll make it purple. And I got to give it a name. It'll yell at you if you don't do things right. So display text. All right, so we're going to connect our last screen here, maybe.
Yeah, just to add to that, Michelle, I think we can also add links, right? So that users can be able to click on those links and open the record that they created.
Yes, that's going to require an action, which is something we're not going to get in today, but you do have the ability to redirect your users to a record or somewhere else in your database at the end of a flow if you want that behavior. That is an option for sure.
I usually don't create action. I will just copy the URL and replace the ID with the way copied. and pass it to the URL link in the same variable.
Yep. Multiple different ways you can do it, so that would definitely work as well. All right, so what we can do is we can run this in debug mode one more time. Now the thing is, you have the option when you debug if you want to run this in rollback mode or not. Now this one, for some reason, does not want to let me choose rollback mode, so this is going to happen live in our orgs as we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and hit run, and I'm going to fill out an account, and just so we can remember what we have on here, these are all of the accounts in my org. I'm going to build an account for Acme Inc., and my contact is going to be the Roadrunner. So let's fill out some things here, and feel free to make this whatever you want in your org. Account information, now I want Mr. Roadrunner. Okay, so I've filled all of that out. We're going to hit next. It's going to walk through everything behind the scenes in your debug log so you can actually see what is going on. But I got to my success screen and it shows me my account for Acme Inc. and my contact for Roadrunner. So over here on the left and or the right, and the reason I really like this is because this shows you exactly what happens as it goes through. So here is the screen that came up. Here is what I put into every one of those fields as I was entering it. So I can tell everything that was done on that screen by the user. Then I can see with the create records, the name equals the account name, which is going to be Acme Inc. When we're done with this, it's ready to create that record. Same thing here. It's going to create that contact. These are all of the values for those fields. And so basically, it's now done that, and we've gotten to our flow screen that was the last of it. So I'm going to come back over to my accounts. I'm going to do a quick refresh. Oh, look, I have Acme Inc. And if I pull up Acme Inc., I also can see that I have a contact for the Roadrunner. So these things do exist in my org. The details are filled out. You can see all of this information in here. So this happened live in our org. Any questions on this one?
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
So my question is about the required field on page layout. So if we have any required field on account page layout, and if we have not added in the account flow, what will happen?
You will get an error. Any required fields or anything that a validation rule is set to trigger on has to be dealt with in your flow, or it will prevent it from creating the records, just like it would in the user interface. So again, in a playground, I don't have anything required, but you'll want to make sure that anything that is a required field for your object or your page layout, even though just required on the page layout wouldn't be required in flow, it's just a better user experience to take care of those. And also, if you have validation rules, they can't have certain combinations of fields or certain things need to be filled out. You'll want to handle that within your flow. So again, a VR rule to make something required, make it required in your flow.
All right, thank you.
Because you'll get ugly errors, and that's where we go into that fault handling. If there is a way for your users to break it, trust me, they will find it. And so then what you can do is, if something cannot successfully happen, so like if we do a create records and the create records fails, you can connect it to a fault path that shows a different screen, or sends an email to you as the admin, or does whatever you need it to do, other than just give them some ugly error message that they don't understand, and then the flow just stops. And that's a bad user experience. So again, that's probably a little bit more than we'll have time to get into today, so I didn't work on that for a basic flow session. But when you're starting to build these for real, definitely keep that in mind. Your users are like toddlers. They are creative, and they will get into everything in ways you never imagined they could break it.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Okay, we got another question on chat. As a best practice, what option do you recommend to choose at the time of saving flow? The one you showed a while ago. There's 3 options to run a flow: system context, all data system context, with sharing, or system or user context, depending on how it's launched. Honestly, for me, it depends on the flow. It depends on the flow and what the user is actually doing and what permissions they need to accomplish what the flow is supposed to do. I have several custom objects where I have fields that should be set initially to certain values, but only modified by other users in a different department. So think terms of a contract that I then want our legal team to basically review and approve. So I will run a flow for them to create that record so that they can set those initial field values on fields that they don't have field level security to. But they need that in order to create the record correctly. But after it's created, I don't want them able to touch it. So doing a flow to create the record in system context where I can say, ignore this user's permissions within the context of this flow. And then once that record is created and they access it through the UI, don't let them touch stuff they're not supposed to. So that's, I love that about flow. It's one of the things I do the most with flows is I need you to do these things, or I need these things to happen and these records to get created, but I don't want you screwing it up by doing it through the UI. So I'm going to basically hold your hand through a Screenflow to do it.
So yeah, so on the same line, I have a question. So once you create the flow, activate or deploy it, so can we change the context, like a run as a system context or those things? The 3 options, can you switch back and forth in production?
Yes, you can change the context of the flow. You just have to save it as a new version.
Okay, like the process.
So, yep, just like Process Builder, you'd have to go in, clone it, and whatever changes you wanted to make would be in that new version. If you switch the context, you'd have to do a save as, and it would be V1 versus V2.
Okay.
Hi, Michelle. So you showed us the flow testing via debug mode, right? Is it possible to show it over the UI, how user will interact?
Yeah, I didn't have that planned for today. Essentially, what you would have to do with this is you'd probably want to override the new account button, or you'd want to put a button on the home screen or something that says create new account in contact to be able to do that. So, and then, yeah, in order to show how that would actually view to users, it's going to essentially be the same as what shows up here, other than it's now going to be probably in a component that's on a different page.
Okay. So we need to add that flow in the Lightning record pages, right?
Yes. So a Screenflow, you're going to need to either launch from a button somewhere, or put it as a component on a Lightning record page or your home page, or somehow surface it up to your users to be able to get to. There's also a great blog by Jen Lee on how you can put it in a global action. So the global actions are accessible from this little plus sign up here. And we actually wrote a very tiny Lightning component. Literally, it was copy and paste code. I do not know how to write Lightning components, and I was able to do this. That literally says you can create a global action that calls a flow. And then it pops up just like every other thing does in this modal down here. So you can pop it open and run the flow right from the screen here. And we do that in my org today for tickets that our users need to submit to our admin team. We actually surfaced a flow that way, a Screenflow, to be able to do that.
Okay. And can we override the standard new button from the flow?
I'm pretty sure you can. It's not something I have personally done, but a lot of times there's reasons that people need to override the standard new button. And so usually, I can't remember if it's override the behavior or if you hide the new button and you create your own button and put it in place of it. But yeah, basically you would build a different version of a new button to use.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Michelle. I have one quick question. So recently, Salesforce made some changes to the flows so that you can do some before update context in the flow as well, right? Like the before trigger. So, like a trigger, Flow can also accommodate multiple. I mean to say, huge data inserts, updates, or like if there is a case, you'll have to go with the trigger only. I mean, between the flow and the trigger, can you do, bulk data inserts or updates using this before context in the flow?
Yes, you can. And so actually we're going to create a new flow for our second. So I'm just going to do that real quick to get to this point. We're going to do a record triggered flow for our second hands-on.
Okay.
And so when we do this, it's going to give you the ability to come in here and set your context. So do you want this flow to run when a record is created, when a record is updated, both, or when it's deleted? So are you familiar with triggers? Is that something you're comfortable with?
Yes, I'm comfortable with the trigger, but some projects, right, they say that they want to use out-of-the-box functionalities, right? So, and recently Salesforce has provided like a before the record is saved context as well inside the flow, but I'm not so sure how that can handle like a bulk data inserts or bulk data updates on an object if we have a before the record is saved flow on that object. So the trigger, I know it can handle, right? If you have if you have written the code in a bulkification manner, it can definitely handle. But with the flow, I'm not so sure. So it's a new feature, so I just want to check with you.
Right. So it depends on what you're trying to do in terms of bulk and maybe how many records we're talking about or anything like that. But yeah, essentially out of the 7 trigger contexts that exist for an Apex trigger to be able to access, 5 of them are available right now to Flow. And so honestly, I'm in team 1 flow per trigger context. So if I were looking at my object, like with processes, they said best practice is 1 process per object. And I argue it could be 2. You either do on creator edit as your 1, and then you use all of your different criteria nodes to decide, does this happen to new records only, edited records only, or can it fire on both based on whatever criteria? Or I split them up and I go, here's everything I want on created, here's everything I want on edited, and so on. Every single criteria node in my edited, I do not is new. So it's not a new record. I don't want you to fire if it's a new record. And that's how I split those 2 up. With flows, so you've got those 5 trigger contexts. So a record is created before and after. So that's our first 2. A record is updated before and after. And then a record is deleted, which you only get before. So that's your 5th context out of the 7, because you don't get to do anything after a record's deleted. And we don't have undelete access for flows. So truly, that's how I would like to start working with flows in my org. Because of the limitation that you can't call subflows, and if I want the same action to happen on a record create and a record update, I don't want to have to write 2 flows and write that same logic in twice. So I am still using this record is created or updated one and kind of squishing it together, but I feel guilty doing it. So yeah, I'm really trying to wait for that subflow access, and then it's going to be 1 for trigger context. And yeah, same thing. I mean, a flow can call Apex. So even if you can't necessarily handle, the bulk record stuff that you need to do within the flow itself, the flow can call the Apex where you already have it written, if that is helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Michelle.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi Michelle, this is Mandar here. So I have a question. Like I'm a beginner in this Salesforce area, so I heard the term process builder as well. So what's the difference between flow builder versus process builder, and which one to use when in what cases?
Okay. Another disclaimer. This is my opinion. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me. I don't see a reason to use processes at this point anymore. Honestly, there's so much that's been built into Flow. I had one person tell me that someone told them there is one thing process can do that Flow can't. For the life of me, I can't tell you what that is. I've looked, I've tried to find it. I still have no clue. So Process Builder is a different user interface. And it's basically like Flow's younger, not quite as cool brother. Flow can do pretty much all the same things that you can with a process, and it can handle it better, in my opinion. So if you're starting, I'd say jump in with flows and get comfortable with those, because that is really the future. It's not that Process Builder is going away, and certainly it will be good for you to learn how to use processes. So if you walk into an org where they're using processes, you have some familiarity with that. But in terms of building new automations, I'm going to say go with Flow. Otherwise, the other argument that you can take is start with a process, and if processes aren't enough, then you can move to Flow. Because what processes cannot do is, if you make a change to an account record, you can trigger a process on that account record, and that can update that record, or it can update a child record or a parent record related to it. But it can't pull any extra information from the database. So if you need to go look at a different object to find information and make a decision on how to make an update based on that, process isn't going to work. If you need to create multiple records, process probably isn't going to work. If you want to update a record that's not directly related through either a master detail or a lookup relationship, processes can't do it. And if you need to delete records, processes can't do that. So honestly, I like Flow because it's the cooler older brother. But yeah, again, just my opinion, and it's not going to hurt you to learn processes. One of the things you could also do to kind of learn them in tandem is build the same thing in both, as long as it's something that a process can handle, and understand the differences. So how do I build this in Process Builder? How do I then go and build the same functionality in Flow Builder, and what does it look like?
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right, how are we doing on time?
We still got 30 minutes.
Okay. So let's see. I'm going to skip our record triggered flow, and instead we're going to go to a loop. So I can show you that one, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to go through both versions of this in the half hour we have left. All right, so scenario 3. When the address on an account is updated, every context address should be updated to match. And we want this to automatically happen when an account record gets saved without any additional work on the part of the user. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to go look and see what accounts we have out here with contacts, because I want to make sure I get an account with more than one contact on it. All right, so United Oil and Gas Corporation has a couple people in it, so we're going to use that for our flow. All right, I'm going to close out all of my old windows that we've been working with. And we're going to start new, and this is going to be a record triggered flow. And because I want to work, still freeform, because I want to work with a record to deal with its child records, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this when it's updated only, because again, you wouldn't want to do this on account create. There are no contacts related to a brand new account to update. But I'm going to do this after the record gets saved. So I want that account record to be fully committed to the database before I go messing with all of its child records. So this just feels more comfortable to me. I'm not necessarily sure that you couldn't do this as a before saved flow, but we're going to do it as after today. And I certainly encourage you to try it the other way if you would like to. Okay, so now that I've configured when I want this to start, the first thing I need to do then is I need to choose the object that this is going to run on. And so I want this to happen when I make a change to account. So then basically I can have conditions here to say I only want to run this on specific types of accounts, or I can come up here and say I want no conditions. Every single account that gets edited, we're going to run this. And so that is definitely an option. It's probably not the greatest option. So instead, I'm going to go to conditions are met. And I'm going to do any condition are met, because if any field on their address is changed, I need to update all of the contact addresses. So for ease of today, we're just going to do if their billing street changes. Oh, it's not going to let me do that. There we go, is changed. And then I need a global constant true. So I want to know if the billing street field was changed. Yes, it was. So my other condition is if my billing state was changed, or my city was changed. So now if you were doing this for real, obviously we'd use more than just these three. It would be any of our account fields, potentially. And so because we used is changed as our operator here, meaning something that was in this field before is not what is in this field now, I don't get to decide when it's going to run, because it's only going to run when it's changed. I basically made this point moot by picking this up here. So, and I used or, so it's any one of these fields is changed. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay. So the way we would have,
okay,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is changed for billing street, is it giving option to everyone, or it's specific to only just fields, like a Boolean field?
I'm sorry, for some odd reason my headset cut out. Can you say that again?
No, the operator is changed. It's specific for any fields, or it's available for every field?
I think it should be available for any field that's on your record.
Okay.
So, okay, so now we're going to do this the old way, and this is the way that probably would end up with limits. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a get records, because I want to find all my child contacts. Get contacts of my account. So what am I going to go get? I'm going to go get contacts. And I want to get not every single contact in my database. I only want to get ones that are from the account that was edited. So I want the account ID field to be equal to, and this is where that reserved variable for $ record comes back in. Whatever account record we changed is going to be referenced by this placeholder called $ record. And so I want just the ID field. So if I type in ID and I scroll down to find the account ID, so I want all contacts where the contacts records account ID field equals the ID field of my account record that got changed. Now it asks me, how many records do I want? Do I want just one, or do I want them all? I absolutely want to get all of them, and I am lazy. Let Salesforce just store all of the fields. It will figure out which ones we need, and it will do them. So if you make changes to this later, you don't have to declare more fields or specify those. Salesforce will figure it out for you. Okay, so now we have our collection. So, and we know by looking over here that we are going to get 1, 2, 3. We're going to get 4 different contact records is what we're expecting. So best practice is after you do a get records, you should always do a decision to figure out if anything was found. So essentially, again, Salesforce is stupid. It only does what you tell it to. So we're going to go where contacts found. And so it's pretty easy. We've got a yes branch, and we're going to have the default outcome. I'm going to just rename it to no. So my yes is going to be that my get contacts, my record collection variable, is it null? And the answer is going to be no. So we're going to go grab false. So if my contacts from get contacts is not null, that means yes, I found contacts. So it's kind of like a double negative or a backwards. We could switch the logic. If is null true, then the outcome is no. But this is just the way it makes sense in my brain. You can do it either way. So, because the thing is, and we're not looking for an ID in here, we're looking for that entire record collection variable. We're looking for that specially shaped bucket. Because if Salesforce can't find anything to put in the bucket, it doesn't even create the bucket itself. So what we're doing is, do you have a bucket? Because if you do, that means there's something in it. And if you didn't have anything to put in a bucket, then you don't even have a bucket. So this is where I want to know, do we have that? Okay. So that's my decision, just to make sure. And so we're going to assume, for the sake of time today, that we're going to find records, because we already know we're going to. So now we have 4 records, and we need to loop through. We've gone to our filing cabinet to take our earlier analogy, and we've pulled 4 files back to our desk, and now we've got that stack on our desk. So now we're going to basically go loop through contacts. So the collection variable, that stack of records on our desk, is all of the contacts that we found on that get contacts of account before. Sometimes there's reasons for you to want to iterate over a collection in a specific order. For us, we don't care, so I just leave this alone. So we're going to go ahead and hit done and connect that to our decision, and it's going to ask us which branch of that decision do we want to actually link this to, and I want the yes decision here. If it's no, you didn't find any contacts, I don't have anything for you to do, so you can just stop and go watch TV, it's fine. Okay, so now that we have a loop, what are we going to do? So we've pulled the first record off the stack and put it in front of us. So now we're going to do an assignment. Because again, we do not want to put pink inside of our loop. So what we're going to do is we are going to call this update contact address. So what we are going to do is we are going to go find that first record. And so the way Salesforce does this for us is we have our record collection variable contacts from get contacts of account. And so then it takes that first one off that pile and puts it into a record variable called current item from loop. And then it's the loop of loop through contacts, which is what we named our loop element before. And so now I can say, okay, on this record, I need to look for specific fields. So we're going to look for the billing street. Or it's the mailing street on contact, sorry. So we're going to update the mailing street. And so I'm going to go back and do that same one again. And this one, I want the city. And back to my loop variable one more time, and my state. Street, city, state, zip. All right, so we'll get that last one here. So now that I have all of the fields that I want to set them equal to whatever's on my account page. And so I'm going to go down here again and find that $ record. That's my account. And we're going to use the billing address. So I want my billing street to be my mailing street. Back down to my $ record again. And this time I'm going to look for my city. And once more to get our state. And finally, back to that account record to pull our zipper postal code. Okay, so now that I have done that, so I've pulled the first record off the stack, I've made the changes to it, and so I'm going to do this for every item in that collection, so every record on my stack. Now I need to do a second assignment that moves it from in front of me on my desk to a pile to my right that says we're going to go put these in the filing cabinet later. So I always call this add to collection to update. And so now we need to create a new variable. So this is the first time that we're actually having to do this. Salesforce isn't going to do this one for us. So when we come in here, we're going to go to a new resource. And so this is where you can pick the different types of resources that you want. And we want a variable. And so I'm going to give this an API name, and this is a collection variable, and I'm going to call this contacts to update, because I want it to be very clear that this is a collection of all of the contact records that I updated the mailing address on that I want to update in my system. So the data type then is record, because we're going to go get an object record of type contact. That's our object. So by doing this, Salesforce knows all of the system fields and custom fields and everything that are on that contact object. You don't have to tell it. It already has that structure that it can access without you having to tell it anything. Now, because this is a collection variable and I need us to be able to hold more than one, there's this very, very important checkbox over here that says allow multiple values. That checkbox is how I turn a single variable into a collection variable. So we hit done and now it's in here. So I have my collection variable. Let's say there's like an outbox over here that's currently empty. Now, instead of setting it to equal this, we need to add to it. So we are going to use the add operator. And then I'm going to go get my current item from loop. This is the record variable that we have been working with where we did all of those assignments. And because it uses that dot notation and it says, okay, well, you've grabbed that record, what field do you want? We're just going to backspace that dot out and say, no, no, I want that whole variable. So when you do it, it should say current item from loop through contacts. So this means the whole record, not just certain fields of it, are getting added to our collection, which, because it's a collection of contact records, makes sense. You can't put a star in a circle-shaped box, essentially. All right, so now we've taken that first record, we've made our updates to it, and we've moved it over to our desk. I'm going to move this down here because what we're going to do next is we're going to start back in our loop. So we're going to go through this loop essentially 4 times. So for the first record, the second record, the third record, and the fourth record. Now when we're done with all 4 of those records, we're ready to walk back over to the filing cabinet. So that's where we're going to grab our update records, and I'm going to put it down here. And this is going to be update contacts. Okay, so what records do we want to update? We are actually going to use IDs and field values from a record or record collection. So because we added all of those to our record collection, we can go find that collection to update, and anything that is in this is going to go get updated in the database. So now I can go ahead and hit done. And I'm going to connect this to the bottom of my loop. If this makes it easier, you can move things around so the lines look a little different. So, I mean, we've got a loop here. You can see which direction it goes. And then when we're done, we go down here, and this is the last step. Okay, time to save. So I'm going to make this count after save. Because that's basically my trigger context and the object that it runs on. And so on V1, updates all contact addresses when account address is changed. This is generally how I make sure I know what is going on in this after save flow. So we're going to go ahead and hit save here. And now this one, we could debug it, but I'm going to go ahead and activate it instead so we can show you this in the wild. All right, so it is now active. So I'm going to grab some of these contacts and open them up. We'll grab 3 of them. That'll be good. So if we look at Stella, we can see that everybody is on the Avenue of Americas in New York. That is the address that we have on all 3 of these contacts. So I am now going to open their account page for United Oil and Gas. We are moving our headquarters from New York to LA. So when we base all this off the billing address, so I am going to make this, oh gosh. That's not the right address, but we're going to use it. It's close enough for where the Salesforce Tower is. And that's not the zip code because I can't remember that either. Which I actually need to get rid of that and put this down here. Okay, so I am about to save the billing address. We can see that's where it is here for the United Oil and Gas Corporation. So I'm going to come back over to Sella. We're going to refresh this. And her mailing address has changed. Let's go back over to Lauren. Same thing. And we'll double check Arthur for good measure. Perfect. So everybody now has a mailing address of 701 Mission Street in San Francisco based on our flow. Now, we talked about how there is a much easier way to do this. So I am actually going to come in here and we are going to just completely tear apart this flow. So I'm going to use my everything grabber tool and I'm going to grab everything on the flow canvas other than this update records and I'm going to delete all of it. Bye-bye. No more. So the way we can do this now is we can go straight to an update records. And the way we're going to do this is instead, we are going to specify conditions to identify records. Okay, so we are going to go search for our contact again. And so which contact objects do we want to update? Well, pretty much like we did with our get records, we want all contacts to get updated where that account ID is equal to our $ record account's ID field. So then, instead of doing our assignment within the loop, we can just set all of these fields right here. So we'll go back to do our mailing street and the city and the state and the zip. And again, we're going to go grab all of these from billing address. That was supposed to be city. Let's fix that one. And then we need our $ record zip code. Okay, so basically we've done the same thing, but we've pulled the loop out. So we've gone straight to an update records. So I'm just going to save this as V2. I'm just going to call it optimized. So again, let's activate this. I'm going to go back to United Oil and Gas Corp. And this time I'm going to change it to we're going to go make this some random address in North Dakota. So again, I'm going to save this. We see it's updated here. So let's go look at Stella. Mission Street in San Francisco. Now it's in North Dakota. Same thing for Lauren. And Arthur. So there you go. That's how you can leverage the new power within Flow to skip having to do loops. You don't have to worry about hitting all those limits, and you can just go straight to any contact that is related to this account, updated all with the account mailing address. So the kicker with that is everything has to be updated to exactly the same thing to be able to do that. Otherwise, you'd have to basically go through one by one, make your decision on, okay, do I want this to be updated or not based on whatever criteria. Okay. So we're running a little short on time. So last couple things I want to make sure we talk about. This is by no means everything that you need to know, obviously. So we will make the deck available and it will have all of these resources. A couple things I really want to point out heavily is the App Exchange has a ton of flow templates, screen components. Salesforce Labs has some flow component starter packs that you can download. Unofficialsf.com is a fantastic resource. The product manager, Alex Edelstein, who works at Salesforce, built this website and has a bunch of community members who have helped him build out really cool screen components, local actions, things that have extended the ability for you to use Flow beyond what Salesforce has done. Those components that we use for email address, for name, those started off as unofficial components, and as they got used more and more heavily, they became official Salesforce components. And it really will extend out your ability to use flows. There's also some fantastic blogs and training material to help you learn more about Flow. Also, Automation Hour, which I now co-host as of a month ago. Every 2 weeks, we have a guest presenter on that has solved a use case using an automation tool, whether it's Apex or Flow or Process Builder. We invite people who use all of these things to come and show us the cool, fun things that they have done and hopefully give the rest of the community some ideas. Some of the things that we talked through today are actually featured in Terry's Tidbits Let's Get Flowing series. It's a 7-part series that walks you through a lot of different things about Flow and how to build a lot of those different types. A couple of my examples are actually from those courses. I taught a couple of those episodes, so more resources for that as well. Okay, it is quiz time. So we're going to start with question number 1. And so do we want to do this answer or do we want to do this through chat answer?
Unofficialsf.com.
Yes, unofficialsf.com.
Yeah,
Well, there we go.
We can do chat answers. Okay.
Okay. So question number 2. If I needed to combine 2 text strings together, which resource would I use? Would I use a variable?
Okay.
Formula.
Awesome. Well, this is going to be easy. You guys are great at this. All right. Question number 3. Under what setup menu heading is flows located?
Flow.
Not flow.
Oh, the name? I always
Yep.
try to search with flow, but I don't know. Maybe automation?
Process automation.
Process.
Yep. Process automation. All right, last question. What is one thing flows can do that processes can't? And there is more than one
Bulkification.
answer.
Bulkification. Deletion.
Before insert, before update,
Yeah.
context.
Right. Yeah, that one too.
Yep. And there's more than one right answer to that one. So we could have plenty there.
Yeah.
Which one you want to pick up? Yeah, definitely delete and looping, I guess. That's okay. So we're done with quiz, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, all right. So based on the quiz, I see the most of the answers coming from Saifuddin Trivedi right away and mostly matching to what we're looking. So, okay. So our first certification voucher winner is Saifuddin for today. Congrats, Saifuddin. You can just email me separately and then we need to fill up some details to get you voucher. So congrats. So we're gonna have a couple more winners. Maybe let me take over the screen and we can do the read of names, and I put all the names who attended today, and then we're gonna just pick up the random numbers names from there. Okay. Let me stop the stream.